This is expected to be a massive week for the Supreme Court, and already some of their decisions are coming out. In this case, it's a big one. It has to do with what was considered the Independent State Legislature theory, which basically says that if you want to rig your state electoral rules in terms of how elections are run, how districts are drawn, you can just do whatever you want and nobody can stop you. No, state Supreme Court, no, obviously the actual Supreme Court, no federal legislature, anything goes, you can do whatever you want. It was a fantasy of some on the right, but it was a fantasy that had a measurable chance of succeeding. The Supreme Court is incredibly conservative, incredibly radical, and incredibly beholden to the right. But it did not actually work, not this time anyway. Basically, to be, I guess, a little bit more fair to them, proponents of the theory say that no other organs of state government, courts, governors, election administrators, independent commissioners can alter a legislature's actions on federal elections. That is not now accepted by the Supreme Court. The vote was 6-3 though. So John Roberts wrote with the majority, but that does still leave 3, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, saying that no, they agree with the independent state legislature theory, that you can effectively have free reign, do what you want, we're gonna keep our hands out of it, and we know exactly what the actual consequences of that would be. Cenk, what do you make of this?
I think this is as consequential as you could possibly imagine. I'm not exaggerating. This was an enormous decision. And I think today, by rejecting this completely radical theory, they have both saved democracy and saved the court. Because if they had done this, then it would have been the nail in the coffin for partisanship on the court. The court would have lost all legitimacy. And by the way, they would have ended democracy. And so it would have been a blight on the Supreme Court that would have been historic. And so, but guys, that means they did the right thing. And it's an enormous relief, but thank God, like this was not preordained which way it was gonna go. I mean, 3 justices voted with this insane, completely anti-democratic idea. Just, I wanna be super clear. It would have had 1,000 repercussions, but the most important one is the Republican state legislatures, which have been gerrymandered beyond recognition, right? So they have a lock on those states. Even though in some of those states, they don't even have the majority and they still have a lock because of the gerrymandering. The legislatures could have said, we don't care who you voted for president. Trump or whoever is the president, period. The votes are irrelevant. The legislature decides. That's what they were deciding today. And so it would have flat out ended democracy. And so as much discredit as you could possibly heap on to the fascist, disgusting justices like Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch. On the other hand, credit where credit is due to Chief Justice Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. So shockingly, they saved democracy.
That's true, I'd forgotten. Yeah, Amy Coney Barrett. By the way, look, we have over the past few years, we have given the Supreme Court credit when they've made the right decision. We're not insane. We can see when something is good or bad. But we could also point out that there are 3 that were fine with this. I agree with you. I don't think it's an exaggeration that it would be as bad as you say were this to get a nod of approval from the Supreme Court. Let's bear in mind though that even in the absence of this new theory, it obviously doesn't mean, as I'm sure you know, that we're off scot-free or whatever. I want to read the first line of the New York Times announcement about this, because it's both true and also ridiculous at the same time. The Supreme Court on Tuesday rejected a legal theory that would have radically reshaped how federal elections are conducted by giving state legislatures largely unchecked power to set rules for federal elections and to draw congressional maps warped by partisan gerrymandering. That is true, but also would have allowed them to do radically partisan gerrymandering. Like, they are already doing that. That's the issue. There are theoretically checks on it, but they're not consequential. Florida did an insane gerrymander. They effectively just gave the map to Ron DeSantis and let him draw his own districts. And then the state Supreme Court, which he appointed a bunch of the members to, said that it was fine. And that's without this independent state legislature theory. And by the way, they also have already radically gerrymandered the state legislatures. As you said, they may not be able to do worse with Congress, but so for instance, to give you an example of it, the case that they're actually talking about here has to do with North Carolina. That legislature, there's a super majority for the Republicans there, thanks to a Democrat switching over. A super majority of the state legislature, it's effectively a 50-50 state. If you look at the actual last election results, it was 49.9 to 48.6. This is about as split as a state can be. And they wanted to capitalize on the power that they've already baked in with a gerrymandered legislative map to create a congressional map that would have given them a 10-4 split in a 50-50 state. That is what basically every Republican in the country, other than perhaps Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett, and John Roberts, say is perfectly acceptable. There's no problem with that. And that's so much of this they've already been able to do, even without this new legal theory being given support by the Supreme Court. So it's like we've avoided a darker next step, Cenk, but we're still in very dark territory.
Yeah, so two things that are important here. One is on the gerrymandering. You're absolutely right, John. We're already 97% awfully gerrymandered, right? And so the court has stepped in, or different courts have stepped in North Carolina, New York, and I believe Alabama, and including the Supreme Court saying, I think it was in Alabama, saying, no, you guys are going too far. This is a racial problem, not just a political problem, because you're basically erasing black voters from with the way that you gerrymandered them, stuffing them into one district. The Clyburn move that he did in South Carolina, helping the Republicans pick up seats as long as his seat was safer. Anyways, so they've reined in like the very extreme last 3%, but it's still super extreme throughout. But this decision, it affects the most extreme gerrymandering. That's not why they saved democracy. It's because the state legislatures could have said, yes, we are not going with the duly, the actual electors in, for example, in the last election. We've convened and we're going with the fake electors, and the state legislature is supreme and gets to overrule the electoral college.
Yeah,
that could have happened. And I guarantee you, if it could happen, Republicans definitely would have done it. And so that's why it saved democracy. The gerrymandering, there's still a long way to go before we get any semblance of sanity in this country regarding that.
I 100% agree with you. I would just end by saying, like, if this had happened, that we just choose the winner thing would have been a lock. It would have automatically happened. But we still have a pretty good chance of them trying that in a number of states. I mean, they're not taking over these county election boards and secretaries of state and all that for nothing. Like they have a multi-level strategy to be able to nullify the results of elections. This just took like the strategy out, but they still have backups. So we do very much need to be on watch as we move towards this next election.